Welcome to our interview series with women human rights defenders. Today we speak with Georgiana Epure, a human rights activist from Romania, who is currently working for an international NGO in London, where she is involved in human rights advocacy and strategic litigation. At the same time, Georgiana is the president of the Association for Liberty and Gender Equality in Romania, where she works on advocacy projects for women's rights, including tackling sexual harassment in the workplace, criminalization of non-consensual pornography, and promoting comprehensive sexual education. She is also a board member of Women Deliver, a leading global advocate that champions gender equality and health and rights of girls and women. Georgiana, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Georgiana, first of all, could you please tell us more about the Association for Liberty and Gender Equality in Romania, what's its aim, main activities, and your role at this organization?
The Association for Liberty and Gender Equality was founded in 2004, and since then our activity has focused on two main areas. One is combating domestic violence, and the second is promoting gender equality more generally. And in doing so, we are managing counseling service for survivors of domestic violence. And we have also established the first national peer-to-peer network for survivors of domestic violence. And in parallel, we run educational activities and advocacy campaigns in order to promote women's rights and gender equality. And we do that in schools by organizing non-formal educational activities with children and students, in doing trainings with police officers, for example, professors, journalists, who are working on this subject of violence against women and gender equality. And we're also running local and national advocacy campaigns, and that includes both policy and legal advocacy. And my role at the association is to oversee the activity of the organization. I'm the president of the board of the association, and I'm also involved in managing and designing the advocacy campaigns.
Thank you very much, Georgiana, for this great introduction. Now I would like to ask you a question about the context where you are advocating in. Because in the last couple of years, we have witnessed a global rise of anti-gender ideology where religious institutions have joined forces with neoliberal, right-wing, populist and authoritarian movements in opposition to women's rights, gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, reproductive freedoms, as well as immigrants' rights and democracy in general. And this is especially the case in Eastern Europe, including, of course, Romania. So, and indeed, we know that the Romanian parliament adopted a law in June 2020 that would have, among other things, banned activities aimed at spreading gender identity theory or opinion in educational settings. So could you please elaborate this law a little bit more? What was the aim, what was the impact, and how the activists in the country did fight back against this law?
I like this question because it allows me to develop a little bit more on the national context, which is very much linked to what you have described, and the rise of anti-gender movements in the country. But it also allows me to speak a little bit more of the legal advocacy work that the association is doing in partnership, in collaboration with other national NGOs and coalitions. But to begin with, the aim of this legislative proposal was to ban gender perspective in education and research in any educational institutions, including those dedicated for professional development and extracurricular activities. So the scope of this legislative proposal was much wider than what we've seen, for example, in Hungary, where university gender studies programs were banned. But the good news is that in the end, this legislative proposal did not become law because the Constitutional Court of Romania declared it to be unconstitutional. This is indeed something to celebrate, especially in our region, where neighboring countries that have seen such judicial attacks on gender equality have taken a totally different approach. And I'm thinking of the Bulgarian Constitutional Court, for example, which a few years ago declared that the ratification of the Istanbul Convention would be unconstitutional because it would allow for the introduction of ambiguous and unclear terms such as gender in legislation. And we're seeing the same sort of rhetoric in Poland and Turkey, again with respect to the Istanbul Convention. In Romania, when this legislative proposal was voted by the parliament in 2020, and I would like to stress that in an EU country such as Romania, this legislative proposal was deemed worthy to be adopted by the parliament, which is extremely problematic. Local and national NGOs have come together and asked the president of Romania to refer this legislative proposal to the Constitutional Court and not promulgate it. And once it arrived at the Constitutional Court, then an impressive number of amici curiae, so third-party interventions sent from experts, were sent to the Constitutional Court, arguing for the unconstitutionality of this legislative proposal. Of course, that conservative groups have also submitted their own amici curiae, but in the end, the court decided that the law was unconstitutional. And what is encouraging is that in the motivation of the decision, the court explicitly stated that there is a distinction between sex and gender, and it has reaffirmed the centrality of human rights standards when adjudicating on gender issues. And this is something that is indeed worthy of celebrating, and it is a win for the gender equality NGOs in Romania. But I'd like to go back to what you have described at the beginning, because it's important to note that the fertile ground for such legislative proposals to be initiated and adopted in the parliament has been laid throughout many years. And we have seen initiatives that seek to curb human rights, especially of women and of the LGBT plus community. We have seen that, for example, in 2018, when in Romania we had a national referendum that sought to amend the constitution in order to make it explicit in the fundamental law that marriage is formed through the union of a man and a woman rather than spouses, as it's currently in the constitution. And I say currently because the referendum failed because the necessary quorum was not met. And I think it's important to mention this episode, because the drive to curb women's rights and gender equality has existed for many years, and it persists. We would not be surprised to see that this drive would be translated in other problematic legislative proposals and judicial attacks on women's rights and minority rights.
Thank you very much, Georgiana, for this comprehensive and great overview. And now I have actually a follow-up question to you. In this context that you have just described, the context of the rise of anti-gender ideology, what do you think are the main challenges that feminist initiatives and LGBTQ+ and women's rights organizations like yours face in Romania? And more specifically, I'm asking what kind of attacks, threats, or right violations that women human rights defenders are dealing with, and how women human rights defenders fight back against those attacks.
I said that there is a wide range of challenges and threats that women rights defenders face, but the most common one would be for sure hate speech and cyber harassment, and the constant challenge of having to police our language, which becomes especially problematic when we're talking about policy advocacy, and language has such an important function there in how policies and laws are formulated, because in the end, through laws and policies, this is how we construct and form the world that we want to see. And this is not specific just to Romania, but in societies such as ours, where the anti-gender movement is becoming stronger and stronger, it's becoming increasingly risky for NGOs to use concepts and words such as feminism and gender equality, gender mainstreaming. So we are permanently put in a position in which we have to make strategic choices about the language that we use, and the sacrifices, the language sacrifices, so to say, that we have to make in order to achieve the goals that we want. And another challenge that I think is gaining more ground is that of having to judicially and legislatively fight for the wins that the gender equality movement has. And I'm thinking of last year when a feminist activist was voted to be part of a national body that has this role, this consultative role for the government and the parliament when there are legislative proposals that are initiated. And it was a huge win for the feminist movement in Romania to have such a person in this national body who was legally voted in. And then when we saw the decision in the official monitor, so that is the registry where all government decisions and laws are published, when we saw that decision about the membership of that particular national body, we saw that in our place a man who did not have nowhere near the number of votes that she has gathered was named instead of her to be part of this council, and this was clearly a move against women's rights and against the gender equality movement in Romania, and was also a sexist move. And it was also a move that speaks larger to how young, because she is young feminist activists are treated by those in decision-making positions. We organized and we contested this decision to the government, and we took other legislative measures. judicial measures, and in the end, her right to be part of this national body was recognized, and she is now celebrating 1 year already being part of this body. This remains a win for the feminist movement in Romania, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Georgiana. And last but not the least, I would like to ask you what personal story or message or lesson learned would you like to share with other women human rights defenders out there?
I have a simple message about expanding our base of allies. And this is a lesson that I have recently learned at the association through our most recent advocacy campaign, that of ratifying the International Labour Organization Convention on Eliminating Violence and Harassment in the World of Work, which we hope that it will be successful. And the reason why we are hopeful is because we have found strong allies in the trade union community. And this is a message that I think will stay with me and my team for a long time, that of looking for allies in spaces that we traditionally do not necessarily work with. So that would be my message for the fellow feminist advocates.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Georgiana, for all the insights that you shared with us today, and of course, the important work that you do. And thank you very much for watching us, and see you in the next interview.